Very much, Mr Speaker. It's a pleasure to take a call on the second reading of the Taxation Annual Rates, Employer Allowances and Remedial Matters Bill. One of the things in listening to the debate about this bill, Mr Speaker, is that the difference of treatment that you hear in this House so often, where one set of rules for one set of people is completely different to another. And it usually goes to do with how much power you have, either as a worker or as a taxpayer. And the disappointing thing, in looking at this bill in the first instance, is that while it changes up a whole lot of rules that have been implemented under the Minister of Revenue, Peter Dunn, such as the tax on plainclothes workers and the accommodation tax on earthquake rebuild workers, it does nothing to address the issue of tax avoidance in this country. Last year, the Inland Revenue found that 107 out of 161 high wealth individuals who own or control more than $50 million worth of assets declared their personal income in the last financial year was less than $70,000. The starting point for the top tax bracket of 3 cents in the dollar. Now, that's just disgraceful. Now, these millionaires use a variety of 6,800 tax planning devices, such as companies, trusts and overseas bank accounts to avoid paying tax. One had a network of 197 entities. So it is disappointing when we have, while this bill is important, and I do believe, Mr Speaker, that the Select Committee has done a good job on tidying it up. It is disappointing to see once again we have a tax bill in this House that does nothing to address the biggest gap we have in our tax system, which is tax avoidance from those who are already very well off and don't need to be avoiding tax. In fact, should be paying their fair share. And that's what tax is about, Mr Speaker. It's about people paying their fair share. And so we support this bill because we support a fair tax system and we support tidying up rules that have been messy and confusing for people, and not only employers but also employees. I do note the comment in the Labour Minority Report, though, about the rushed process. And once again, I'm sorry to have to repeat myself because I seem to say there's quite a lot of that in the House. This is a very complex bill. It has pages and pages of addendum to it. The process through the Select Committee was over the Christmas period, which made it very difficult to address the issues, and I again congratulate the Select Committee who worked hard to get that done, but also congratulate the submitters who had to gather their thoughts, interrupt their Christmas and their New Year to help the government out, because it somehow, somewhere along the way, mucked up the process. I wanted to also talk about some of the employee entitlements. Jamie Lee Ross said, that he was referring to Andrew Little, I think, when he was talking about muckraking. And I mean, the member can't help himself if he forgets. He's got such a stressful life. He does forget people's names from time to time. But it isn't muckraking to talk about the differences in treatment in one piece of legislation and another. And I can't help but be struck by the fact that this piece of legislation, while it deals with tax breaks on meal entitlements, we have another piece of legislation in this House that actually plans to reduce the rights of every other worker in the country to meals and rest breaks. Similarly with the accommodation treatment, Mr Speaker, there are a range of situations that have been described, and the Select Committee have extended that, so it applies to mobile workers and others. But then there are farmers and migrant workers working on farms, and I particularly want to mention the RSE scheme. The RSE scheme is started by Labor. We depended on those migrant workers to come here and work in New Zealand to pick our fruit. But, it was this government that actually reduced the accommodation allowance for those workers. It used to be minimum wage plus accommodation. It's now minimum wage including accommodation. So what about them? And then there's clothing allowances. Now, I've had a call from someone who talks about how he works in the snow for a car rental company and it has to wash cars outside in the pouring rain, and he gets no clothing allowance and no clothing entitlement. So it's not fair, Mr Speaker. I'd like to see some balance in future legislation.
Julianne Ginter.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I rise to take a short call on behalf of the Green Party on the Taxation, Annual Rates, Employee Allowances and Remedial Matters Bill. I will speak about two areas